She's smiling, waving at her guests, completely unaware that I've switched the USB drive. In 5 minutes, the screen won't show their baby pictures. It will show the transactions from my inheritance account. The invitation arrived on a Tuesday, nestled between a gas bill and a takeaway menu for a pizza place that had closed down months ago. It felt heavier than the other mail, not just in weight but in significance. Olivia knew what it was before she even saw the postmark. The envelope was thick, creamy cardstock, the kind that felt important to the touch. Her name and address were written in shimmering gold calligraphy, a looping, ostentatious script that was so quintessentially Chloe. She carried it inside, placing the other letters on the small table by the door, and held the invitation in both hands. For a moment she just stared at it, a perfect, unblemished rectangle of ivory and gold. It was a peace offering, she supposed. Or a summons. With Chloe, the two were often indistinguishable. Taking a deep breath, she slid her thumb under the wax SE, a custom monogram of a C and an L intertwined. It cracked with a soft final sound. Inside, the invitation was even more opulent. A heavy letterpressed card announced, in the same golden script, that Chloe Elizabeth Vance and Liam Michael Peterson request the pleasure of your company at the celebration of their marriage. Below, the details were laid out. Saturday, the 14th of October, at Blackwood Manor, a historic estate 2 hours north of the city that was notoriously expensive, a place reserved for society weddings and corporate galas. A separate, tissue-thin sheet detailed a weekend of festivities, a welcome cocktail reception on Friday evening, the ceremony and dinner on Saturday, and a farewell brunch on Sunday. It was less a wedding and more a coronation. Olivia sank onto the edge of her sofa, the card feeling cold in her hands. A bitter laugh escaped her lips, small and humorless in the quiet of her apartment. Blackwood Manor. Of course. Chloe had been dreaming of a fairy tale wedding since they were children, sketching princesses in poofy dresses getting married in castles. It seemed she was finally getting her castle. The question was, how in the world was she paying for it? The last Olivia had heard, Chloe was working as a junior marketing associate at a mid-tier firm, and Liam was a personal trainer. They lived in a trendy but cramped apartment with rent that, by their own admission, stretched them thin. They weren't destitute, but they certainly weren't renting out a historic manor for an entire weekend wealthy. The dissonance was jarring. She thought back to the last time she'd seen her sister 6 months ago at their parents' funeral. It had been a stilted, painful affair. Their grief was a chasm between them too wide to cross. After the service, during the reading of the will, the tension had thickened into a palpable, suffocating fog. Their parents, ever the peacekeepers, had split everything equally. The house, their savings, their investments, a neat, clean 50-50 split. It was a substantial sum, enough to provide a comfortable future for both of them. Olivia, practical and cautious, had immediately met with the family lawyer, Mr. Abernathy, to have her share moved into a secure trust, setting it aside for a down payment on a house someday. Chloe, on the other hand, had bristled at the idea of caution. "It's our money now, Liv," she'd said, her voice sharp with a defensive edge. "We don't need old men in suits telling us what to do with it." That was Chloe. Always impatient, always wanting the reward without the work, the shine without the substance. Their entire childhood had been a testament to it. If Olivia saved her allowance for weeks to buy a new book, Chloe would wheedle their mother into buying it for her that same day. If Olivia worked diligently on a school project, Chloe would charm a classmate into doing the bulk of the work for her. And their parents, blinded by her dazzling smile and quick-witted excuses, always let her get away with it. They saw Chloe's ambition as spirit, her manipulation as charm. They saw Olivia's diligence as, well, they just saw it as Olivia. Dependable. Steady. The one who didn't need as much attention because she could handle things on her own. The invitation felt like a continuation of that lifelong narrative. It wasn't a humble request for her sister to be present. It was a demand for her to bear witness. "Look at me. Look at what I have. Look at what I've achieved." It was a performance, and Olivia had just been handed a front-row ticket. Her finger traced the raised lettering of the date. She should be happy for her. That's what sisters were supposed to feel. A swell of something like happiness or at least affection should have risen in her chest. Instead, all she felt was a familiar, weary ache of resentment, a feeling she had been trying to bury for years. It was the same ache she felt when Chloe announced she was dating Liam, a man Olivia had quietly crushed on in college. The same ache she felt when her parents paid off Chloe's credit card debt for the third time, while Olivia was meticulously budgeting to pay off her student loans. She stood and walked to the window, looking out at the brick wall of the neighboring building. The city lights were just beginning to flicker on, painting the dusk in shades of orange and gray. She could just say no. She could send back the RSVP card with the regretfully declines box ticked, no explanation offered. It would be easy. It would draw a line in the sand, a final, undeniable statement that she was done playing her assigned role in the family drama. It would be a relief. But it would also be a surrender. It would be letting the chasm between them swallow everything, including the faint, flickering memories of a time when they were just sisters, sharing a bedroom, whispering secrets in the dark. A time before envy and rivalry had poisoned the well. And what would their parents have wanted? The thought came unbidden, a painful pang in her chest. They would have wanted her to go. They would have wanted their daughters to stand together, to fix what was broken between them. She looked back at the invitation, at the golden, looping letters. Enclosed with it was a smaller card, this one with only her name on it. She picked it up. Liv, it read in Chloe's messy, hurried handwriting. I know things have been difficult. But it would mean the world to me if you were there. More than that, I want you to be my maid of honor. The air left Olivia's lungs in a rush. Maid of honor. It was a masterstroke of manipulation, a gilded cage disguised as an honor. How could she refuse that? To decline the wedding was one thing, but to reject the role of maid of honor was a public declaration of war. It would brand her as the bitter, jealous sister in the eyes of their entire extended family. Chloe knew that. She had to have known. It was an olive branch, yes, but it was wrapped so tightly around a threat that Olivia could barely breathe. Be there, smile, and play your part, or you will be the villain of this story. A cold, heavy certainty began to settle in her stomach. The lavishness of the wedding, the impossible venue, the sudden, magnanimous gesture of making her maid of honor, it didn't add up. Something was wrong. The numbers didn't work, and the sentiment felt hollow, calculated. She slid the invitation and the note back into the thick, creamy envelope. She wouldn't RSVP just yet. She would go to the wedding, yes. She would stand by her sister's side, hold her ridiculously expensive bouquet, and smile for the cameras. She would play the part Chloe had written for her. But she wouldn't do it blindly. Before she set one foot in Blackwood Manor, she was going to find out exactly how a junior marketing associate was funding a royal wedding. The invitation wasn't just an invitation anymore. It was a puzzle. And Olivia, for the first time in a long time, felt a grim determination to solve it. The following Monday, Olivia found herself sitting in the sterile beige waiting room of Abernathy, Finch, and Associates. The air smelled of old paper and weak coffee. A ficus plant in the corner looked as weary as she felt, its leaves dusty and drooping. It had been 6 months since she'd last been here, a visit shrouded in the immediate raw grief of her parents' passing. Back then, Mr. Abernathy had been a comforting, grandfatherly figure, his calm demeanor a steadying hand in the storm of her loss. Today, however, Olivia's nerves were stretched taut for an entirely different reason. She clutched her leather satchel on her lap, the expensive wedding invitation tucked inside like a piece of damning evidence. The thought of it, with its gold leaf and creamy cardstock, felt obscene in this muted, practical space. She had called Mr. Abernathy's office on Friday, her voice carefully neutral, requesting a meeting to review her trust portfolio. His secretary had booked her for the first available slot. Now, waiting for her name to be called, a knot of anxiety tightened in her stomach. This felt clandestine, like an act of betrayal. She was investigating her own sister. But the alternative, to ignore the blaring alarm bells in her head, felt like a betrayal of herself. Ms. Vance? Mr. Abernathy will see you now. The secretary, a woman with a helmet of perfectly coiffed gray hair, led her down a quiet, carpeted hallway. The walls were lined with framed diplomas and photos of Mr. Abernathy shaking hands with various local dignitaries. He was a pillar of the community, their family's trusted legal counsel for over 30 years. He had helped her parents draft their first wills, set up their business, and finally plan their estate. He was supposed to be infallible. He rose from behind a large mahogany desk as she entered, his smile warm, but his eyes, behind thick-lensed glasses, seemed tired. Olivia. It's good to see you, my dear. Please sit. The guest chairs were plush leather, and she sank into one, the scent of old books and wood polish filling the air. For a moment, she was transported back to being a child, sitting in this very office while her parents discussed things she didn't understand. She had always felt safe here. "Thank you for seeing me on such short notice, Mr. Abernathy," she began, her hands folded primly in her lap. "Nonsense. I'm always here for you and Chloe. Your parents would have wanted that." He settled back into his chair, steepling his fingers. "Now, what can I do for you? Your portfolio is performing quite well, very stable. Low-risk bonds, a few solid index funds. Exactly as we discussed." His reassurance did little to soothe her. "That's good to hear. It's just, I'm thinking about the future. A down payment on a house, perhaps. I wanted to get a clearer picture of my assets, a full, itemized statement from the initial transfer to today." It was a reasonable request, but a subtle shift occurred in the lawyer's posture. It was almost imperceptible, a slight tightening of his shoulders, a flicker in his gaze. "Of course. A full accounting. I can have my clerk print that out for you right away. Is there a particular transaction you're concerned about?" "No, not at all," she lied, her voice a little too bright. "Just doing my due diligence." He nodded slowly, his eyes lingering on her for a beat too long before he pressed the intercom button on his desk. "Margaret, could you please print out the full statement for the Vance Trust? From inception to present." "Thank you." The wait for the documents was agonizing. Mr. Abernathy attempted small talk. The weather, a local sports team, a new restaurant downtown, but Olivia could only offer clipped, distracted replies. Her mind was racing. Was she being paranoid? Was she inventing a conspiracy out of simple sibling jealousy? The thought was mortifying. Maybe Chloe and Liam had won the lottery, or Liam had a rich, secret benefactor. The explanations grew more ludicrous as her anxiety mounted. Finally, the secretary returned, placing a thin stack of papers on the polished desk. "Here you are, Mr. Abernathy." He slid the stack across to her. "There you have it." Olivia's hands trembled slightly as she took the papers. She scanned the first page, the initial deposit of her inheritance, the sum exactly as she remembered it. She flipped through the next few pages, her eyes glazing over the columns of numbers, minor dividends, small management fees deducted monthly. It was all mundane, exactly as it should be. The knot in her stomach began to loosen. She was a fool. She had manufactured this entire drama in her head. And then she saw it. On the last page, dated 3 months ago, was a single glaring line item. A withdrawal. Not a small sum, but a massive one, nearly half of the entire principal. Her breath caught in her throat. The blood drained from her face, and the room seemed to tilt on its axis. Her eyes darted from the staggering number to the description next to it. Wire transfer to Vance/Peterson joint account. Vance/Peterson. "Mr. Abernathy," she said, her voice a strangled whisper. She had to force the words out. "What is this? This transfer? I never authorized this." The lawyer took off his glasses, rubbing the bridge of his nose with a weary sigh. He suddenly looked every one of his 70 years. "Ah. Yes. I was hoping you and your sister had discussed this." "Discussed what?" The question came out sharper than she intended, the edge of panic honing it to a fine point. "I haven't spoken to Chloe about finances in months. What is the Vance/Peterson joint account? Who is Peterson?" But she knew. Oh God, she knew. Liam's last name was Peterson. "Your sister came to me a few months ago," he began, his voice low and placating. She and her fiancé were looking to consolidate their assets in preparation for their wedding and for buying a home. She opened a new joint account. She said she had spoken to you, that you had agreed to loan her a portion of your inheritance as a short-term investment in their future. She had the necessary paperwork, a signed authorization letter. A signed? Olivia stared at him, bewildered. "I never signed anything." "The signature was a perfect match for the documents on file," he said, his tone becoming defensive. He opened a drawer and pulled out a file, shuffling through papers until he found a single sheet. He slid it towards her. It was a letter authorizing the transfer, and at the bottom, in a flawless imitation of her own cursive, was her name. A wave of nausea washed over her. It was a forgery. A masterful, cruel forgery. Chloe had always been good at mimicking handwriting. As children, she would forge their mother's signature on permission slips, her skill so uncanny it was a running joke between them. It wasn't a joke now. She told you I agreed to this? Olivia's voice was hollow. She was very convincing, Mr. Abernathy said, refusing to meet her eyes. He looked down at his desk at the damning papers spread across it. She spoke of family, of how you two were all each other had left. She said you wanted to help her and Liam get a strong start. The words were a bitter poison. Family. Chloe had weaponized their parents' memory, using the grief that was supposed to bind them together to instead drive a wedge of pure deceit. The pieces clicked into place with horrifying clarity. The extravagant wedding wasn't being paid for by a lottery win or a secret benefactor. It was being paid for by Olivia. Every gold leaf letter on the invitation, every future petal in the floral arrangements, every catered meal for 200 guests, she was funding her own sister's grand deception. A cold, hard fury began to solidify in her chest, displacing the panic and the shock. It was a chilling, clarifying anger. Mr. Abernathy was still talking, murmuring apologies and explanations about fiduciary duties and verified signatures, but his words were just a meaningless buzz in her ears. He was a ghost in this room, a relic of a past where trust meant something. The only person in the world who mattered now was the architect of this lie. Olivia stood up, her movements stiff. She carefully folded the bank statement and the forged letter, her hands surprisingly steady, and slid them into her satchel, next to the wedding invitation. They were two parts of the same ugly story. "Thank you for your time, Mr. Abernathy," she said, her voice devoid of all emotion. "Olivia, please," he started, looking up at her, his face a mask of regret. "We can report this. There are legal avenues." She looked down at the old man, the trusted family friend who had failed her so profoundly. "No," she said, the word as cold and sharp as a shard of glass. "I don't think the law will be necessary." She turned and walked out of the office, leaving him sitting in the suffocating silence of his mahogany tomb. She didn't know yet what she was going to do, but as she stepped out into the bright, unforgiving sunlight, one thing was certain. Chloe had started a war. And Olivia was going to end it. The drive back from the lawyer's office was a blur. Olivia remembered the glare of the sun on the windshield and the tight, painful grip of her hands on the steering wheel, but the streets she passed might as well have been on a different planet. The world outside her car, with its mundane traffic and pedestrians living their ordinary lives, felt like a fiction. The only reality was the cold, heavy weight in her satchel and the roaring in her ears. Back in her apartment, she didn't turn on the lights. She simply sank onto her sofa in the dim afternoon light, the silence pressing in on her. 4 hours, shock held her in a state of suspended animation. She stared at the forged letter and the bank statement laid out on her coffee table. The numbers swam before her eyes, a testament to a betrayal so profound it felt unreal. This wasn't a simple act of theft. It was a calculated violation, a desecration of their parents' memory and the trust that was supposed to be the bedrock of their sisterhood. Chloe hadn't just stolen her money, she had stolen her signature, her identity, her future. As dusk settled, painting her living room in shades of gray and purple, the shock began to recede, and in its place, a cold, crystalline rage began to form. It was different from the hot, fleeting anger she had felt in the past over Chloe's smaller selfishnesses. This was a deep, structural anger, the kind that settles into your bones and changes you. She knew with absolute certainty what Chloe had done. But knowing wasn't enough. She needed proof. Not just of the withdrawal, but of the destination. She needed to see the breadcrumb trail, to follow every single dollar from her trust fund into the gilded fantasy of her sister's wedding. The next morning, she started her research. The legal system felt too slow, too public. She didn't want to press charges, not yet. That would make it a messy family dispute, a headline for local gossip. She wanted something cleaner, more precise. Her search led her to the world of private financial investigation. After 2 dead-end calls to firms that felt more like something out of a cheap detective novel, she found a discreet, highly rated agency specializing in forensic accounting. She booked a consultation for that afternoon. The Office of Harrison Financial Forensics was the antithesis of Mr. Abernathy's mahogany-lined study. It was modern, minimalist, and impersonal, all glass and chrome and sharp angles. The man who greeted her, Mr. Harrison, was much the same. He was in his late 40s, with a sharp suit, a sharper haircut, and eyes that seemed to take in everything without revealing a thing. He didn't offer condolences or platitudes, he offered a cup of black coffee and listened. Olivia laid out the story, her voice low and even, stripped of the turbulent emotions churning inside her. She presented the documents, the statement from her trust showing the massive withdrawal and the forged authorization letter. She gave him the name of the destination account, Vance/Peterson joint account. Mr. Harrison examined the papers under a desk lamp, his expression unreadable. A signature forgery of this quality is premeditated, he stated, his voice a calm baritone. The thief knew what they were doing. He looked up at her. You want to know where the money went? You want a transaction history for this joint account? Yes, Olivia said. I need to see everything. Because of the nature of the fraud, you being a direct party whose signature was forged to facilitate the transfer, we can subpoena the bank records for the destination account. It's a formal process, but it's straightforward. It will take a few business days to get a response from the bank's legal department. He named his fee. It was steep, but Olivia didn't even flinch. It was a small price to pay for the truth. She paid it on the spot. The next 3 days were the longest of her life. She went to work, moved through her daily routines like an automaton, her mind constantly elsewhere. She ignored 3 calls from Chloe, letting them go to voicemail. The first was bubbly and cheerful, asking if she'd gotten the invitation. The second sounded slightly annoyed, a familiar impatience creeping into her tone. The third was a text message, Liv, call me. We need to talk about maid of honor duties. Dresses. XOXO. The casual, breezy entitlement of it made Olivia's stomach clench. On Thursday afternoon, an email from Mr. Harrison arrived in her inbox. The subject line was stark. Transaction records attached. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She clicked it open. There was a short, professional message. Ms. Vance, please find the requested documentation in the attached PDF. Let me know if you require further analysis. And a single file. She took a deep breath, her hand trembling as she moved the cursor and clicked. The document loaded, a crisp, soulless bank statement from a national bank. At the top, the account holders were listed, Chloe E. Vance and Liam M. Peterson. The first entry, dated 3 months ago, was a deposit. The exact amount down to the last cent that had been stolen from her trust. Seeing it there, in black and white, was like a physical blow. That was her money. Her safety net. Her future house. And it was just the beginning. She scrolled down, her eyes scanning the list of debits, and the breath she was holding escaped in a ragged gasp. It was all there. A detailed, itemized ledger of Chloe's betrayal. Transaction date, June 12th. Payee, Blackwood Manor Events LLC. Amount, $50,000. The deposit for the venue. $50,000. Olivia felt dizzy. That single transaction was more than her annual salary. Transaction date, June 15th. Payee, Eclat Bridal Couture. Amount, $18,500. The dress. Olivia pictured Chloe, twirling in front of a 3-way mirror in a cloud of white silk and lace, smiling that radiant smile of hers, all paid for with a lie. Transaction date, June 20th. Payee, The Gilded Spoon Catering. Amount, $32,000. Food and drink for 200 people. Olivia thought of the modest dinner parties she hosted, carefully budgeting for groceries, and felt a surge of hot, acidic rage. The list went on, each line a fresh stab wound. There was petals and panache floristry for $12,000. A 5-figure payment to a famous wedding photographer. A deposit for a live band. And then, near the bottom, a charge that made her blood run cold. Transaction date, August 2nd. Payee, Azure Horizons Travel Agency. Amount, $25,000. Below it, in the transaction details, payment for honeymoon package Maldives Overwater Bungalow Suite. They were going to the Maldives. They were going to walk on white sand beaches and swim in turquoise water, celebrating their new life together on the ruins of Olivia's. The audacity of it, the sheer, breathtaking selfishness, was staggering. She leaned back in her chair, the printed pages trembling in her hands. This wasn't just a wedding, it was a monument to Chloe's greed. She had looked at Olivia's future, at the money their parents had left to provide for her, and saw nothing but a shopping list for her own desires. She hadn't just borrowed, she had pillaged. The rage that had been simmering inside her for days finally boiled over, consuming every last ounce of doubt, grief, and hesitation. There was no room left for sisterly affection, no space for forgiveness. There was only the cold, hard certainty of the numbers on the page. Chloe had built her fairy tale on a foundation of lies. And Olivia knew, with a clarity that was both terrifying and exhilarating, that she was going to be the one to burn the castle to the ground. She looked at the statement again, not as a victim but as an archivist. She had the evidence. She had the proof. Now, all she needed was a venue to present it. And Chloe, in her infinite arrogance, had already sent her the perfect invitation. The drive back from the lawyer's office was a blur. Olivia remembered the glare of the sun on the windshield and the tight, painful grip of her hands on the steering wheel, but the streets she passed might as well have been on a different planet. The world outside her car, with its mundane traffic and pedestrians living their ordinary lives, felt like a fiction. The only reality was the cold, heavy weight in her satchel and the roaring in her ears. Back in her apartment, she didn't turn on the lights. She simply sank onto her sofa in the dim afternoon light, the silence pressing in on her. 4 hours, shock held her in a state of suspended animation. She stared at the forged letter and the bank statement laid out on her coffee table. The numbers swam before her eyes, a testament to a betrayal so profound it felt unreal. This wasn't a simple act of theft. It was a calculated violation, a desecration of their parents' memory and the trust that was supposed to be the bedrock of their sisterhood. Chloe hadn't just stolen her money, she had stolen her signature, her identity, her future. As dusk settled, painting her living room in shades of gray and purple, the shock began to recede, and in its place, a cold, crystalline rage began to form. It was different from the hot, fleeting anger she had felt in the past over Chloe's smaller selfishnesses. This was a deep, structural anger, the kind that settles into your bones and changes you. She knew with absolute certainty what Chloe had done. But knowing wasn't enough. She needed proof. Not just of the withdrawal but of the destination. She needed to see the breadcrumb trail, to follow every single dollar from her trust fund into the gilded fantasy of her sister's wedding. The next morning she started her research. The legal system felt too slow, too public. She didn't want to press charges, not yet. That would make it a messy family dispute, a headline for local gossip. She wanted something cleaner, more precise. Her search led her to the world of private financial investigation. After 2 dead-end calls to firms that felt more like something out of a cheap detective novel, she found a discreet, highly rated agency specializing in forensic accounting. She booked a consultation for that afternoon. The Office of Harrison Financial Forensics was the antithesis of Mr. Abernathy's mahogany-lined study. It was modern, minimalist, and impersonal, all glass and chrome and sharp angles. The man who greeted her, Mr. Harrison, was much the same. He was in his late 40s, with a sharp suit, a sharper haircut, and eyes that seemed to take in everything without revealing a thing. He didn't offer condolences or platitudes, he offered a cup of black coffee and listened. Olivia laid out the story, her voice low and even, stripped of the turbulent emotions churning inside her. She presented the documents, the statement from her trust showing the massive withdrawal and the forged authorization letter. She gave him the name of the destination account, Vance/Peterson Joint Account. Mr. Harrison examined the papers under a desk lamp, his expression unreadable. A signature forgery of this quality is premeditated, he stated, his voice a calm baritone. The thief knew what they were doing. He looked up at her. You want to know where the money went? You want a transaction history for this joint account? Yes, Olivia said. I need to see everything. Because of the nature of the fraud, you being a direct party whose signature was forged to facilitate the transfer, we can subpoena the bank records for the destination account. It's a formal process, but it's straightforward. It will take a few business days to get a response from the bank's legal department. He named his fee. It was steep, but Olivia didn't even flinch. It was a small price to pay for the truth. She paid it on the spot. The next 3 days were the longest of her life. She went to work, moved through her daily routines like an automaton, her mind constantly elsewhere. She ignored 3 calls from Chloe, letting them go to voicemail. The first was bubbly and cheerful, asking if she'd gotten the invitation. The second sounded slightly annoyed, a familiar impatience creeping into her tone. The third was a text message, "Liv, call me." We need to talk about maid of honor duties. Dresses. XOXO. The casual, breezy entitlement of it made Olivia's stomach clench. On Thursday afternoon, an email from Mr. Harrison arrived in her inbox. The subject line was stark. Transaction records attached. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She clicked it open. There was a short, professional message. Ms. Vance, please find the requested documentation in the attached PDF. Let me know if you require further analysis. And a single file. She took a deep breath, her hand trembling as she moved the cursor and clicked. The document loaded, a crisp, soulless bank statement from a national bank. At the top, the account holders were listed, Chloe E. Vance and Liam M. Peterson. The first entry, dated 3 months ago, was a deposit. The exact amount down to the last cent that had been stolen from her trust. Seeing it there, in black and white, was like a physical blow. That was her money. Her safety net. Her future house. And it was just the beginning. She scrolled down, her eyes scanning the list of debits, and the breath she was holding escaped in a ragged gasp. It was all there. A detailed, itemized ledger of Chloe's betrayal. Transaction date, June 12th. Payee, Blackwood Manor Events, LLC. Amount, $50,000. The deposit for the venue. $50,000. Olivia felt dizzy. That single transaction was more than her annual salary. Transaction date, June 15th. Payee, Eclat Bridal Couture. Amount, $18,500. The dress. Olivia pictured Chloe, twirling in front of a three-way mirror in a cloud of white silk and lace, smiling that radiant smile of hers, all paid for with a lie. Transaction date, June 20th. Payee, The Gilded Spoon Catering. Amount, $32,000. Food and drink for 200 people. Olivia thought of the modest dinner parties she hosted, carefully budgeting for groceries, and felt a surge of hot, acidic rage. The list went on, each line a fresh stab wound. There was petals and panache floristry for $12,000. A 5-figure payment to a famous wedding photographer. A deposit for a live band. And then, near the bottom, a charge that made her blood run cold. Transaction date, August 2nd. Payee, Azure Horizons Travel Agency. Amount, $25,000. Below it, in the transaction details, payment for honeymoon package Maldives Overwater Bungalow Suite. They were going to the Maldives. They were going to walk on white sand beaches and swim in turquoise water, celebrating their new life together on the ruins of Olivia's. The audacity of it, the sheer, breathtaking selfishness, was staggering. She leaned back in her chair, the printed pages trembling in her hands. This wasn't just a wedding, it was a monument to Chloe's greed. She had looked at Olivia's future, at the money their parents had left to provide for her, and saw nothing but a shopping list for her own desires. She hadn't just borrowed, she had pillaged. The rage that had been simmering inside her for days finally boiled over, consuming every last ounce of doubt, grief, and hesitation. There was no room left for sisterly affection, no space for forgiveness. There was only the cold, hard certainty of the numbers on the page. Chloe had built her fairy tale on a foundation of lies. And Olivia knew, with a clarity that was both terrifying and exhilarating, that she was going to be the one to burn the castle to the ground. She looked at the statement again, not as a victim but as an archivist. She had the evidence. She had the proof. Now, all she needed was a venue to present it. And Chloe, in her infinite arrogance, had already sent her the perfect invitation. The rehearsal dinner was held in the private cellar of an obscenely trendy downtown restaurant, a space with exposed brick, mood lighting, and wine bottles lining the walls like silent, sleeping soldiers. The air was thick with the scent of truffle oil and expensive perfume. As Olivia stepped inside, the wave of noise and forced merriment was a physical blow. 30 of Chloe and Liam's closest family and friends were already there, champagne flutes in hand, their laughter echoing off the stone walls. It felt less like a room and more like a beautifully decorated echo chamber of deceit. Chloe, a vision in a white silk jumpsuit that probably cost more than Olivia's monthly rent, rushed over and enveloped her in a tight, air-kissing hug. "Liv, you're here. Doesn't everyone look amazing? And isn't this place divine?" She didn't wait for an answer, already turning to wave at Liam's parents across the room. Olivia had to actively fight the urge to recoil. Playing her part required a level of self-control she hadn't known she possessed. She smiled, a brittle, paper-thin expression she'd practiced in the mirror. "It's beautiful, Chloe." For the next hour she was adrift in a sea of pleasantries. She was introduced to Liam's relatives, a parade of smiling, well-meaning people who all said the same thing: "You must be so proud of your sister." And, "It's just wonderful how close you two are." With every handshake, every polite nod, Olivia felt a piece of herself calcify. She was a ghost at this feast, a silent observer watching a play for which she had unwillingly paid every single expense, from the artisanal breadsticks on the table to the very roof over their heads. She watched Liam, who was glowing with a kind of guileless, uncomplicated joy. He moved through the room with an easy charm, his arm perpetually around Chloe's waist, his eyes following her as if she were the only person there. He looked utterly besotted, completely in love. The question that had been nagging at Olivia sharpened into a painful point. Was he in on it? Could this happy, earnest man be a co-conspirator in such a cruel deception? Or was he just another victim, duped by the woman he was about to marry? She found she couldn't decide which possibility was worse. Just as the main course was being served, a sudden technical glitch plunged the room into silence as the curated background music cut out. Liam clapped his hands together. "Well, that's no good. We need some tunes." He looked around. "The DJ for tomorrow gave us a playlist on a stick, but I left it at the hotel. Does anyone have a USB drive with some music on it? Just anything to plug into the speaker." His eyes scanned the room and landed on Olivia. "Liv, you're always prepared. You don't have one in your bag, do you?" Time seemed to slow down. In her purse, nestled at the bottom beside her wallet and keys, was the simple black USB drive. Her weapon. It was loaded and ready, containing the slideshow that would detonate her sister's life. For a terrifying second, she pictured him taking it, plugging it in, and her meticulously planned revenge going off prematurely in a wine cellar in front of 30 people. Her heart leaped into her throat, pounding a frantic, panicked rhythm against her ribs. She forced a laugh, a small, tight sound. "Sorry, Liam. I'm all digital, cloud-based these days. Left the stone age of USB drives behind years ago." He grinned, oblivious. "Worth a shot. No worries." He moved on, asking someone else, the moment of crisis passing as quickly as it had arrived. Olivia took a shaky sip of her water, her hand trembling. The close call left a metallic taste of adrenaline in her mouth. This was real. The risk was real. After dinner, Liam's father, a gentle silver-haired man named George, stood up to propose a toast. He raised his glass, his eyes misty with emotion. "I'd like to say a few words about the two people who brought us all here tonight," he began, his voice warm and steady. "About my son Liam, who has found a happiness I always dreamed for him. And about the incredible woman who is the source of that happiness, Chloe." He turned to Chloe, his smile full of paternal affection. "Chloe, from the moment Liam introduced you to us, we knew you were special. You have a spirit, a drive, that is truly something to behold. We've watched you and Liam work so hard to build a life together, to plan this absolutely breathtaking wedding. Your generosity and character shine in everything you do, and we are so proud to call you our daughter." Olivia's stomach twisted into a tight, painful knot. She stared down at her plate, at the artfully smeared remains of her dinner, fighting the urge to stand up and scream. Generosity? Character? The words were poison. This good, kind man was praising a thief, toasting a fantasy his family would soon be humiliated by. The collateral damage of her plan suddenly had a face, and it was looking at Chloe with love. For a moment, her resolve wavered. Then it was Liam's turn. He stood, pulling Chloe to her feet beside him. He looked only at her, his voice thick with emotion. "To my Chloe, you make everything in my life feel like an adventure. You dream bigger than anyone I know, and then you find a way to make those dreams a reality. You are the most ambitious, brilliant, incredible woman I've ever met. I can't wait to spend the rest of my life trying to keep up with you." He leaned in and kissed her, and the room erupted in applause. "You find a way to make those dreams a reality," Liam had said. And she had. She had found a way, and that way was grand larceny. The last of Olivia's doubts burned away in a flash of white-hot anger. Liam's words, intended as a loving tribute, were the final piece of confirmation she needed. He didn't know. He was a fool, blinded by love and ambition. He saw Chloe's theft not as a crime, but as a magical ability to manifest her desires. He was celebrating her for the very thing that was destroying Olivia. Then, a hush fell over the room as all eyes turned to her. It was the maid of honor's turn. Her heart hammered against her ribs. This was her rehearsal, too. She stood slowly, picking up her barely touched champagne flute. She held it aloft, her hand surprisingly steady. She looked directly at her sister, whose face was a perfect mask of joyful expectation. "I'd like to propose a toast," Olivia said, her voice clear and carrying through the silent room. "To my sister, Chloe." She paused, letting the moment hang in the air. "Growing up, I was always in awe of her. She has a unique talent for seeing what she wants in the world, and a remarkable determination to get it, no matter the obstacle." She smiled, a slow, deliberate curving of her lips that didn't reach her eyes. "She taught me that there is no dream too big, no price too high for what you truly desire." She raised her glass a little higher. "So, here's to Chloe and Liam. May you both get everything you deserve." The room applauded, filled with the warmth of her seemingly heartfelt words. Liam's mother dabbed at her eyes. Liam kissed Chloe's temple. "And Chloe?" Chloe beamed at her, a dazzling, triumphant smile. She had heard only the tribute, completely deaf to the venomous prophecy laced beneath it. Olivia sat down, the bubbles from her champagne dying on her tongue. The performance was over. And she knew, with every fiber of her being, that she was ready for opening night. The day of the wedding dawned bright and painfully beautiful. Sunlight, as golden and syrupy as honey, poured through the mullioned windows of the bridal suite at Blackwood Manor. Outside, the sprawling lawns were impossibly green, dotted with ancient oak trees and meticulously manicured rose gardens. It was a perfect day, a day meticulously crafted for a fairy tale. To Olivia, it felt like a mockery, the world itself colluding in her sister's grand lie. The bridal suite was a whirlwind of controlled chaos. A team of hair and makeup artists buzzed around Chloe, who was perched on a velvet chaise long like a queen holding court. Empty champagne bottles stood alongside half-empty glasses, and the air was thick with the chemical haze of hairspray and the cloying sweetness of expensive perfume. 3 other bridesmaids, friends of Chloe's from work and college, flitted about in matching silk robes, their chatter a high-pitched, incessant hum of excitement. Olivia moved through it all with a preternatural calm, a small, quiet island in the eye of the hurricane. She fulfilled her duties with a chilling efficiency. She steamed the wrinkles from the bridesmaids' dresses, she laid out Chloe's jewelry on a velvet tray, she liaised with the wedding planner who kept popping in with frantic updates. On the outside, she was the picture of a devoted maid of honor, helpful, serene, and supportive. Inside, her nerves were stretched as thin and taut as piano wire. Every smile felt like a crack in a porcelain mask. Every polite, "Yes, of course," was a lie that tasted like ash in her mouth. Her clutch purse, a simple satin accessory that matched her lavender bridesmaid dress, sat on the dressing table. It felt as heavy as a block of lead. Inside, nestled between her phone and a tube of lipstick, was the black USB drive. Her own personal detonator. Several times she saw Chloe's eyes drift towards it, and Olivia's heart would seize, but her sister's gaze would simply skim over it, an object of no importance, before moving on to something that glittered. "Liv, be a doll and get me another mimosa, would you? And not too much orange juice this time," Chloe called from her throne, waving an empty flute. "And can you check with Marcus, the photographer? I want to make sure he knows my left side is my good side. It's critical." "Of course," Olivia said, her voice smooth and even. She moved to the champagne bar set up in the corner, her hands steady as she poured. She watched her sister's reflection in the ornate mirror. Chloe was breathtaking. Her hair was swept into an intricate updo, her makeup was flawless, and her happiness was so radiant it was almost blinding. She was the star of her own movie, and she didn't seem to have a single doubt that she deserved it all. There was no flicker of guilt in her eyes, no shadow of remorse. There was only pure, unadulterated triumph. Later, after the stylists had packed up and the bridesmaids had gone to get dressed, the 2 sisters were alone for a few moments. The room was suddenly, unnervingly quiet. Chloe was standing in her wedding dress, a magnificent creation of lace and tulle that cascaded around her in a shimmering cloud. She turned from the mirror and looked at Olivia, her expression softening for the first time all day. "Okay, how do I look?" she asked, her voice uncharacteristically small. "You look beautiful, Chloe," Olivia said, and the words were true, which somehow made them the most painful words she'd spoken all day. Chloe's eyes welled up with tears, and she quickly fanned her face with her hands. "Don't make me cry. You'll ruin $1,000 worth of waterproof mascara." She took a step forward and, with a rustle of silk, grabbed Olivia's hand. Her fingers were cold. "I'm so glad you're here, Liv. Really. It wouldn't be the same without you." She squeezed her hand. "Mom and Dad would have loved this. They would have been so happy." The mention of their parents was a deliberate, calculated blow. Olivia felt it land deep in her gut. Chloe was using their memory as the final seal of approval on her swindle, invoking their love to sanctify her crime. Any lingering wisp of doubt Olivia might have had, any last-ditch fantasy of a quiet reconciliation, evaporated in that moment. This wasn't just about money anymore. This was about reclaiming her parents' legacy from a sister who saw it as nothing more than a source of funding. Olivia gently pulled her hand away under the pretense of straightening Chloe's veil. "They would have wanted you to be happy," she said, her voice a hollow echo of the truth. The ceremony took place in the manor's formal gardens under a canopy of white roses. 200 guests sat in perfect, orderly rows. Olivia walked down the aisle first, her steps measured, her eyes fixed on the altar. She could feel the weight of all those gazes, the collective goodwill of a crowd completely duped. She saw Liam waiting, his face alight with an unbearable, incandescent love. He looked at Chloe as she appeared at the end of the aisle, and his expression was one of pure, unadulterated awe. He was innocent. Olivia was certain of it now. He was just another one of her sister's victims, the most deeply conned of them all. The thought gave her no comfort. She stood beside her sister, a silent witness. She listened as Chloe recited her vows, her voice ringing with sincerity. She promised to love, to honor, to cherish. She promised to be honest, to be faithful, to build a life of trust and truth. Each word was a perjury, a slap in the face to Olivia, to Liam, to the institution of marriage itself. When the officiant pronounced them husband and wife, a roar of applause went up from the crowd. They turned, beaming, and walked back up the aisle as Mr. and Mrs. Peterson, showered in a blizzard of white rose petals. The joy was overwhelming, infectious. The storm of celebration had begun. Olivia followed in their wake, the dutiful maid of honor. She smiled and clapped along with everyone else. But as she walked, she clutched her purse, the small, hard rectangle of the USB drive, a point of grounding reality in a world that had gone insane. The calm was over. The performance was about to begin. And the curtain was about to fall on Chloe's perfect, beautiful lie. The reception hall was a masterpiece of calculated extravagance. Chandeliers dripping with crystals cast a warm, golden light over the 200 guests, the glow reflecting off the polished dance floor and the legion of champagne flutes. Towering centerpieces of white roses and peonies, the very flowers the florist had insisted were out of season, stood on every table, their scent mingling with the aroma of roasted duck and fine wine. The 5-tiered wedding cake, a marvel of sugarwork and artistry, stood in the corner like a monument. It was a perfect scene, a fantasy brought to life, and as Olivia sat at the head table, she felt a grim, proprietary satisfaction. She had paid for every last petal, every crystal, every crumb of cake. The dinner had been served, the wine had flowed, and the best man had given a charming, funny speech that had left Liam beaming and Chloe dabbing delicately at her eyes. They had swayed through their first dance to a soft, romantic ballad, two silhouettes moving as one in the center of the spotlight, the picture of idyllic love. The joy in the room was a tangible thing, a thick, warm blanket of celebration and goodwill. Olivia watched it all, a silent observer from behind enemy lines, her heart a cold, steady metronome counting down the final minutes of her sister's reign. This was her last chance to turn back, to let the lie stand, to swallow the poison and walk away. The thought was a fleeting ghost, insubstantial and weak. She had come too far. Just as the band was striking up a more upbeat tune, the wedding planner, a woman with a sleek blonde bob and a headset, leaned in and whispered to the DJ. He nodded, and a moment later his cheerful, amplified voice cut through the convivial chatter. "All right, everyone, if I can have your attention for just a moment." The guests quieted down, turning their faces toward the stage. "Before we open up the dance floor, we have a very special presentation. A trip down memory lane, a beautiful tribute to our bride and groom, put together with love by the one and only maid of honor, Olivia. A ripple of applause went through the room. Olivia felt the weight of 200 pairs of eyes settling on her. From across the table, Chloe caught her eye and gave her a brilliant, encouraging smile, mouthing the words, "Thank you." It was the most exquisitely ironic moment of Olivia's life. She stood, her movements feeling both fluid and strangely disconnected, as if she were watching herself from a great distance. The walk from the head table to the DJ booth at the edge of the dance floor was perhaps 20 yards, but it felt like miles. The plush carpet seemed to suck at the heels of her shoes. The faces of the guests, aunts, uncles, old family friends, Liam's smiling parents, were a blur of indistinct, happy shapes. The only thing in sharp focus was her own reflection in the polished floor, a slim figure in lavender silk, walking calmly and deliberately toward the point of no return. The DJ, a young man with trendy glasses, grinned at her. "Ready to make him cry? Got the USB?" Olivia opened her small satin clutch. Her fingers, cold but perfectly steady, closed around the familiar hard plastic of the black USB drive. She pulled it out and handed it to him. He took it, his touch casual, oblivious to the fact that he was holding a bomb. "Here we go," he said into the microphone. "Let's dim the lights, folks, and get the tissues ready." The chandeliers faded to a low, intimate glow. A massive screen, which had been discreetly retracted into the ceiling, descended behind the band. The soft, instrumental opening of a popular, sentimental ballad began to play through the speakers. On the screen, the first image faded into view, a grainy photograph of two toddlers in a bathtub, Chloe laughing hysterically while a more serious Olivia tried to wrestle a rubber duck from her. A collective "ah" rippled through the audience. The next photo appeared, the two of them on their first day of school, gap-toothed and wearing matching dresses their mother had sewn. Another murmur of nostalgic appreciation. Olivia watched Chloe, who had her head resting on Liam's shoulder, a dreamy, happy smile on her face. She was completely captivated, completely at ease. The trap was set. Then it happened. The screen flickered. The sentimental music cut out, replaced by an abrupt, jarring silence. A few people murmured, thinking it was a technical glitch. The DJ frowned and tapped at his laptop. But Olivia knew it wasn't a glitch. It was part of the presentation. The image that appeared on the screen was not a photograph. It was a crisp, high-resolution scan of a bank statement, the familiar logo of the National Bank stark against the white background. At the top, in a bold sans-serif font, was the title Olivia had typed herself, "The Down Payment." An arrow, a vicious slash of red, pointed to a single highlighted line item, a wire transfer of $50,000 to Blackwood Manor Events LLC. A wave of confusion washed over the room. There were whispers, the sound of people leaning towards each other, asking what they were looking at. Before the shock could fully register, the slide clicked forward. The dress, $18,500. Another scan, another red arrow pointing to the transaction with Eclat Bridal Couture. The room had gone completely silent. The sound of a single fork clattering against a plate was as loud as a gunshot. Click. The catering, $32,000. Click. The flowers, $12,000. With each slide, the truth landed with the force of a physical blow. The beautiful fantasy Chloe had constructed was being systematically, brutally dismantled, replaced by the cold, hard accounting of its true cost. The final slide was the most devastating. Click. The honeymoon, $25,000. The payment to Azure Horizons travel agency for a trip to the Maldives. Below it, Olivia had added one final line of text, the account from which the funds had been transferred, the Olivia Vance Inheritance Trust. The silence in the room was no longer just quiet. It was a deep, profound void, sucking all the air and life out of the celebration. Every single guest was frozen, their faces a mixture of horror, disbelief, and dawning comprehension. Slowly, like a tide turning, 200 pairs of eyes shifted from the damning evidence on the screen to the head table to the bride herself. Liam was staring at the screen, his face ashen, his jaw slack with utter incomprehension. He looked from the number for the Maldives trip to Chloe, his expression crumbling from confusion into the first terrible flicker of betrayal. But Chloe was looking at Olivia. Her radiant, joyful smile was gone, frozen and then shattered into a million pieces. The color had drained completely from her face, leaving her skin a ghastly white that made her expensive makeup look like a clown's mask. Her eyes, wide and terrified, were locked on her sisters across the cavernous room. In them Olivia saw not remorse, not shame, but the pure animal panic of being caught. Olivia didn't smile. She didn't move. She simply stood by the DJ booth, her work complete, and held her sister's gaze. The fairy tale was over. The castle had crumbled. And in the suffocating silence of the ruined reception, the bill had finally come due. The silence in the great hall of Blackwood Manor stretched for an eternity, a taut, vibrating vacuum where joy and music had been only moments before. It was broken not by a shout, but by a sound that was far more terrible, a single wretched sob torn from Chloe's throat. It was the sound of a universe collapsing. That was the signal for the chaos to begin. The whispers started first, a low, venomous hiss that swept through the room as guests turned to each other, their faces masks of horrified glee. A chair scraped loudly against the floor as Liam's father, George, rose to his feet, his face pale and stricken. Liam himself seemed paralyzed, his eyes locked on Chloe, who was now covering her face with her hands, her whole body shaking. The illusion had not just been broken, it had been atomized. This was the scene of her victory, the culmination of months of planning and cold, simmering rage. But as Olivia stood there, watching the wreckage unfold, she felt no triumph. There was no triumphant surge of adrenaline, no sweet taste of victory. There was only a vast, hollow emptiness. This was not a celebration, it was a demolition, and she was standing at the epicenter. She had done what she came to do. To stay any longer would be to wallow in the ruin, to pick through the bones of the life she had just incinerated. With a quiet finality she turned. She walked away from the DJ booth, her steps even and unhurried. No one tried to stop her. No one even seemed to notice her departure. All eyes were fixed on the head table, on the bride whose perfect day had just become her public execution. Olivia walked past the towering, untouched wedding cake, a monument to a future that would never happen. She walked past the stunned faces of her relatives, their expressions a mixture of shock and a dawning, morbid curiosity. She pushed open the heavy oak doors of the reception hall and stepped out into the cool, dark night. The sounds of the imploding party faded behind her, replaced by the gentle chirping of crickets and the rustle of wind in the ancient trees. The air was clean and cold, and she breathed it in deeply, a stark contrast to the suffocating atmosphere inside. She walked across the manicured lawn, her heels sinking slightly into the soft grass, not stopping until she reached her car in the distant guest parking lot. The drive home was 2 hours of dark, empty highway, the rhythmic sweep of her headlights the only thing cutting through the blackness. The adrenaline from the confrontation slowly drained away, leaving behind a bone-deep weariness. The silence in the car was absolute, a stark contrast to the turmoil in her mind. She thought of Chloe's face in that last moment, the raw panic in her eyes. She thought of Liam's stunned, betrayed expression. She thought of his kind, gentle parents, their pride and joy turning to public shame before their very eyes. She had sought justice, but the justice she had delivered felt brutal, almost savage. A pound of flesh for every stolen dollar. By the time she reached her apartment, a fragile, gray light was beginning to creep into the eastern sky. She walked inside, the silence of her own home a comfort rather than a void. She took off the lavender bridesmaid dress, letting it fall to the floor in a heap of satin and bad memories. She stood under a scalding hot shower for a long time, scrubbing away the scent of roses and champagne, trying to wash away the feeling of the entire sordid affair. But it was a stain that went deeper than skin. The days that followed were defined by a profound silence. Her phone, which she had expected to explode with furious calls and texts, remained quiet. No one from her family reached out, not a single aunt, uncle, or cousin. She had not only exposed her sister, she had excommunicated herself. She was the bringer of truth, and for that she had been cast out. A week later, she received a short, formal email from Liam's mother. It was carefully worded, devoid of accusation. It simply informed her that the marriage had been annulled and that Liam and his family were requesting privacy. There was a single painful sentence at the end: "We are sorry for your loss, Olivia." It was then that Olivia realized she hadn't just lost a sister, she had lost an entire life, an entire history. She was an island now. The hollow feeling in her chest began to recede, slowly replaced by something else, something quieter and more resilient. It wasn't happiness, not yet. It was resolve. Chloe had tried to steal her future, and in seeking her revenge, Olivia had put that future on hold. Now it was time to claim it. The following Saturday, she did what she had been planning to do before an opulent invitation had ever landed in her mailbox. She made an appointment with a real estate agent. She took the statement for her inheritance trust, the real one showing the half of her inheritance that remained untouched, and walked into the agency's office. A few weeks later, the agent took her to see a small house on a tree-lined street in a quiet, older neighborhood. It was a modest place, a brick bungalow with a small, slightly overgrown garden and a welcoming front porch. It was nothing like Blackwood Manor. It was small, it was real, and it was attainable. Olivia stood on the sidewalk, looking at it. The paint on the trim was peeling slightly, and the flower beds were choked with weeds, but the house had good bones. It was a foundation. She could see herself living there, planting a new garden, painting the walls a color of her own choosing. She could picture a future built not on lies or stolen funds, but on her own hard work and resilience. She had lost a sister, a family, and a past she could no longer look back on without pain. The price of the party had been astronomically high for everyone involved. But as she stood there, looking at the little brick house, Olivia realized what she had gained. It wasn't revenge. It was freedom. The freedom to build a life that was entirely, completely, and finally her own. And for the first time in a very long time, that felt like enough.